everyone, Genome here, coming at you with another episode in my continuing interview series of people who do interesting things, and hopefully it gives you a good look at the inner person behind the works. You know, we're not just here about works, we're here about people. So today's guest has been so kind to join me from the wilds of North Carolina, not too far from where I live, actually. We're talking about none other than Stuart Jaffe, published author of numerous books, over 30 at this point. Isn't that correct, Stuart?
Yeah, definitely.
So
thank you for having me.
Oh, no problem. It's a pleasure. And I reached out to him after meeting him at a book fair several months ago in Charleston. And once again, he was kind enough to give me the proverbial time of day. So we're going to go ahead and ask Stuart a couple questions. And in the future, if you like what you see here, don't forget to put a comment below. Also, like and subscribe if you don't mind. And if you have any questions of Stuart, I'm sure if this gets a lot of action, maybe we can do a follow-up sometime with your questions. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Are you ready, Stuart?
I'm ready.
All right. I probably asked you 16 times today, but here we go. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I write mostly in science fiction and fantasy, different subgenres of it. I have 3 current running series, and I have some old series that are finished out. My biggest selling series is the Max Porter Paranormal Mysteries. They're about a guy who moves down to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and discovers his office is haunted by the ghost of a 1940s detective. So he does what situation would do. There it is. And he starts a detective agency with a ghost. And I take real history, usually really odd history of the area, and mix it with witches, ghosts, curses, and magic. I also write the Nathan Kay thrillers. They're fantasy thrillers. They're kind of like John Wick with immortality. And I write the Parallel Society series, which is about a gal who works in a family bookstore up in Pennsylvania and discovers Grandma and Grandma's 2 elderly friends have been saving the universe for decades and decades and decades. It's hard to keep that going with a bad back and arthritis, so they want her to take over fighting all the monsters. I've also written science fiction standalones and time travel standalones, and I have a short story series called The Bluesman. It's 9 short stories that make one full story. And if you think of that as season 1, season 2 is being done as a graphic novel, which has been in the works for many years, but actually the first issue will be out this year, and that's with John Jennings, who's won the Eisner Award, and Garrett Gainey, who is an up-and-coming artist who's just incredible. So I can't wait for people to see it, because I've seen the finished art, and it's incredible.
It's amazing how much art can tell a book, isn't
it? Yeah.
So how long have you been in the literary game?
Getting close to 20 years now. So, yeah, I started doing it. Yeah, it's been a long time. I started out doing short stories for about 10 years. This is back way before self-publishing was viable or even respectable. And so I did short stories for about 10 years, and near the end there I wrote a novel and went that whole route, did that whole game for a long time. And my agent would send my books. My books went to all the top publishers, Tor and Bain and the Spectrum and all the things. Some publishers that don't even exist anymore. And I was told over and over, we love his writing, we love his characters, we love his stories, love, 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 love. We're not going to buy it. Over and over and over, which is not atypical. That happens frighteningly often. And I've gotten to a point after, this would have been going in about 12, 13 years, where I thought, well, I guess it's not going to happen, and then maybe I should do something else with my life and all this. And right around then, self-publishing had come around. And it took me about a year to get over the idea that self-publishing was a fad, because I've been, for the decade before of my life, self-publishing was a dirty word. And then I just tried it. And the second I put a book out, it originally was just a collection of some of my short stories from over the years. And when I put it out, I instantly felt like I did my early first couple of years, where I was just so excited to do it. I was excited to write again, and I really haven't looked back. It's just been a blast ever since then. it's a hard road any way you cut it, and it's still hard, but it's.
Yeah, I watched something of yours a little while ago. I remember you saying you had some trepidation about getting started writing a novel. It was kind of a big mountain to climb, and I believe you gave yourself some sort of pep talk saying, hey, if I can write a page a day, I basically have a novel at the end of the year. Is that kind of the approach you
Yeah.
took to your first novel? Or
So my first novel, yeah, because whenever somebody tries to write that first novel, it seems like this insurmountable mountain. And so I just committed to a page a day, and I figured hopefully at the end of a year, 356 pages would be, or 365 pages would be a full book, and hopefully it would make sense. And like everybody's first book, that one was utter crud. I mean, it was a terrible book. But I completed it, and once you've done that, you gain a couple really important things. First and foremost, you realize you can write a full-length novel, and which is important because if you're going to be a novelist, you end up writing a lot of them. And so that, once you've scaled that mountain, suddenly it's no longer seems so big. And more importantly, though, is now you have a finished piece of work that you can go back and figure out why it didn't work. Why is it so terrible? Because everybody out there listening to this, if you're writing your first book, I want you to finish it, but I want you to know that it's terrible. It just is. There's no possible way you can write a brilliant piece of work without ever having written a novel before. It's just not possible. I mean, I'm a guitarist. There's no way I could pick up a guitar and just on the first day play like I can now after having played for over 30-some years. I do some math in my head there. But I've been playing since I was 15. Yeah. So, it's been a long, long time. And so it's just amazing. It's a weird thing, I think, because we've all know how to physically write. We all know how to write sentences because we've been doing it in grade school since. But there's a big difference between just being able to write a sentence and being able to write an effective sentence and create an effective story and make those words do what you want to do. Yeah. It takes practice.
Oh yeah. See, I remember I reached out to you a little bit, and I kind of gave you an example. Like when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I was prolifically writing poetry. I was just writing it haiku. It doesn't matter what kind of poetry, stream of thought poetry. It was out there, and I put it all in a box after I got out of that phase for a while. And I looked at it like 5 years later, and I threw it all into a burn pile. I was like, "This is awful. This is sophomoric. It's horrible. No one but me would even enjoy it, and I don't even enjoy reading it." So yeah, I can definitely see how. After you get past the euphoria of finishing your first novel, that you can look back upon it a little bit and say, this is not as great. But don't be discouraged. So, keep on driving on.
Oh, yeah.
So, are you writing full-time now? Is that your primary occupation?
That is what I do.
How long have you been doing that, basically, as your sole income? Or not sole income, but I mean...
I was going to say, I've been writing full-time for a long, long, long time. It has been paying the bills for a much shorter time. And that's kind of true of just about every author except for the biggest names. This is I guess this is still a misconception. And I back in the days before self-publishing and indie publishing, I can remember talking to new writers, and I'd say, go into a bookstore and go and just look at all those books, and like, at least 90% of those authors are not making a living off of those books. They might be full-time writers, but they're not making enough money off of those books. And that's still true. Indie publishing has done some wonderful things, and because of the royalty structures and the way things can work, more people than ever can make a living doing it. But it's still hard, and there's more people in the business now than ever before. So it's still good if you have a spouse who can bring in income, or investments, or whatever you have to bring in income, and you think of your writing income as supplementary. That's usually the better way to go about it. Because for me, it's been in the last, up until last year, I used to, like on panels, I would say that my writing income paid the mortgage. So it was doing really well. But it wasn't a full-time. It wasn't covering everything. Now it is. Now it covers everything, and I don't have to drain other monies that I have, and I can let those monies hopefully grow and provide a retirement. But at least at the moment, that's the way it is. And that's another thing about a full-time living as a writer, is it's a self-employed situation, which means you have to be very comfortable with uncertainty. One month you're gonna, this year alone, January was fantastic for me. I made a lot of money in January, and literally the next month to the day, February 1st came, and it just went way back down. And February was not a good month. I still covered my costs. I didn't lose anything, which is important. But I wasn't, making a lot of money. And then March was more average, and we'll see what happens this month. But it goes in peaks and valleys, and you have to hope it averages out to a good income.
Now, with the advent of the self-publisher nowadays, this question might not be as relevant, but really, how important is it to know somebody in the business to get your start as a writer, to be able to do this full-time? Do you need to be friends with a publisher or another established author to get your name in the door, or
Right.
do you just brute force it in, you keep sending it in until they have to accept you?
So, like you said, with indie publishing, there is no door anymore. You can just go up and do it. Ultimately, the first thing you have to do if you're a writer and you're looking at getting into this, the first thing you have to do is have a heart-to-heart with yourself, which is good to do like every 5 years or so. But the first question you got to ask is, what is it that you want to accomplish? What are you trying to actually, like what's the end goal for you? If your goal is to make a living, that's very different and will set you down a different path than if your goal is to be a household name. And that is, being a household name is one of a couple paths that may or may not be different from I want to be rich. I want to be Stephen King. I want to be a household name who's making millions and getting TV deals and movie deals. Those are all different things. And there are a million other possible combinations, including I've known people who, a very good author who has a full-time income as in another another occupation that pays him very well, so he needs no money from this. He just wanted to see his name on a bookshelf in a bookstore. That was his initial goal, and he wants an audience. He puts his heart and soul in his books, but if he's not making a lot of money off of it, he doesn't care. So he has a different route because he doesn't rely on that money. I'm not trying to not answer your question, but
no.
all those different routes require different things. So if you're trying, but this kind of answers your question a little bit. If your goal is to be Stephen King, is to be rich and famous, that's like winning a lottery ticket. There's no way you can guarantee it, but your best chance at it is to be with a major publisher. It's not to say you can't do it as an indie. There are plenty of indies who do it. There are plenty of indies who I shouldn't say plenty. There are indies who make millions doing this, but they're not well-known names. It's weird. I'll talk to people like, well, so-and-so, right? And they're like, who? And I'm like, that guy's literally making 7 figures every year, and you don't know his name, but you know Stephen King, or all these other big names who may or may not be making that kind of money anymore. You never know. But the major publishers will get those names out there, even if they don't make a lot of money. There are big name authors who make very little money because of bad contracts and because dealing with major publishers can be a nightmare. However, if that's your goal, that's the way to do it, and the best way to get there is, yes, to know somebody. If you know somebody, if you don't already know them, or family members, or have some other contact, if you know nobody, you go to conventions, especially in my genre. You go to conventions where they are, and you meet them. You put out your hand, shake your hand, and pitch in your book, and get to know them. And that's the way it is. It's true of any business, really. But it helps to know people.
Yeah, I imagine that's how many romance novelist writer got their start. They wanted to write other things, and then they realized I got to pay the rent, so I better put out the swashbuckling pirate romance novel really quickly and get that copy sold. But
well, yeah, I know you're saying that jokingly, but you should know that those people, the majority of them are excellent writers who care greatly about that genre. I would love to write romance novels. It is a very lucrative. It is probably the most lucrative genre, or it can be. And it is just because the last statistic I heard, and this is going back a few years, but something like 85% of all readers are women, and romance is one of their favorite genres. So obviously, that's where a lot of the money is. And romance readers tend to be voracious readers. They'll read multiple books in a week and just devour this stuff. So if you're a good writer, if you understand the genre you're in and can do it well, yeah, you can do very well in that genre. But you can do really horribly in that genre if you don't know how to write good romance, especially if you're doing the more hot, erotic kind of romance. I mean, they have entire websites devoted to really, really bad sex scenes and things like that because that's hard. It's very difficult to write that stuff well.
Yeah, I've read plenty of very well-known authors who cannot do romance at all. It's so it comes off very wooden, and I imagine it's very difficult to write. If you're not a wildly passionate person, or an effusive kind of person, that might be kind of difficult to write that way. So, yeah, I can see that being difficult.